It's definitely been a little while since I've made an update on the lawn to food forest conversion project on our neighbor's property. Just looking at the first video, I first mentioned the idea of thinking about doing this March 21st, I believe, or 20th. So we're at around the 3-month mark of execution here. So we're still in the first season. Let me show you what's been going on. If this is a completely new subject to you for this channel, check out our playlist. I'll link to it here, and you can watch back through from the initial discussion to planting out. But I'm just gonna hop right into it and show how things are doing. I made a video very recently talking about the potatoes, and I can link here to that. So overall, the potatoes that we put in are doing quite nicely. I did go through and get some soil around them to hill them, but the hardwood cuttings of the willows that we put in, so again, the idea there was maybe in the future, my neighbor would be interested in having sheep here. His mother has sheep. And so in that case, let's get some fodder growing. Even if that doesn't come to pass, this would be a nice place for birds to land and do their thing. And I also suspect that once we get the willows really established and they're up and growing, this central alley in here could be an interesting place to plant crops that want to vine. So cucumbers, peas, and beans. And we can prune and manage the willows to allow light in and train vining crops up that. So lots of different ways that this simple planting block can go. And you can see that what we've done on the edges here is planted buttercup squash. So a common theme that you'll see throughout all of this in the update is wherever there's a boundary between a garden bed and a mowed space, we've planted sprawling winter squash in the hopes that the squash reduces the amount of mowing I need to do in the season. That's one aspect to this that is just, it's a challenging thing. We could let it be completely feral and not mow at all, but I like the idea of trying to keep things tidy and looking nice so that our neighbor feels excited to look out his window and see what's going on. And so this morning I went through with my electric string trimmer and hit the very edge of these garden beds and just went right under things. You'll see that as we go. And then I'll use a push mower, a reel mower with a bag on the front to collect what the string trimmer hit, but then also do a mowing, and all of that will get sent to our chickens. So there's a harvest, there's a yield to do that mowing, but it's certainly a fair bit. I've done this now 3 times, so basically once a month. Certainly less frequently than an average lawn, but it's still work for sure. Some of the other longer term perennial scaffold elements in here. So the idea with the food forest concept, at least the way I interpret it, is how do we plant out plantings that will be here in the long term? So in other words, woody, long-lived perennials. So for example, I'm pointing at elderberry, I'm pointing at seaberry, there's autumn olive, there's hazelnut. So in other words, what's the long-term successional canopy plan? How do we set that in motion? And while we're waiting for those to fill in, it's going to be a few years before that's the case. How do we fill in with fast-growing annuals to occupy as much of the space as possible with production? And so the elders, the serviceberry, they went through the droughty period that we had with good graces. They were very patient. They drooped a little, but we just finally got a good solid inch of rain, so they're getting caught up. Really putting down the deep layers of old mulch hay, waste hay, was very helpful. And anytime we got a little bit of rain, we dumped some compost either from the chicken yard or from wherever. It didn't have to be finished, but a nice nutritive mulch. And now they're off and really running. In fact, there's a lot of new growth in the last few days. I think these are well on their way to being in good shape. The seaberry, I'm just, the ways in which I'm impressed with seaberry, let me count the ways. It's many, many. We went through some dryness for sure. And these plants you saw in another video where I planted them in here. These are suckers and runners that we put in this spring. They never got watered. They are, some of them 5 or 6 feet tall. Some of them are 8 feet tall. Not only did they flower, not only are they starting to make fruit, which is crazy. They're already going to make fruit in the year that they're getting established, but they were able to handle that drought. And some of them are definitely a lot less leafed out. You can see this one went through some stress and probably will shed a few leaves from having gone through that. But pretty stunning plant. Really wet feet, really dry. It just seems to be able to handle context. It's the beauty of those early succession pioneer plants. If you remember from a past video, I had gestured vaguely at the idea of a pond on the west side of this. Well, it turns out our neighbor had a tractor with a bucket and is insanely deft with it. Very, very skilled worker. And he started on a pond. So he had about 30 minutes he could do before he had to go. But we got down as deep as the bucket will go in this one spot. We have a lot more work to do. This is going to be a lot larger, but basically from the water line down to the bottom is about 7 feet or so. And I'm doing the handwork with a shovel to make levels and steps. Right now it's very, very steep. We'll probably need to drain this at some point and get things more graded, or let it slump in and then get that out. But what I've done is gone through and scooped the biggest rocks, the sod, what have you, and dumped it all around this willow area. We'll cover this with compost soon and seed this out to a mix of daikons and turnips, maybe some beans and beets. You can see on the far end before, so the overflow will be through here, which will meander through our garden, but I made a flat area for rice production. I had a whole bunch of these rice that I had started. In fact, I still have that whole crate to find a home for. So put in a few here just to see how they're doing, and set up a solar panel and a little pump, which is right in that water very simply. And already we're able to pull water from this. I guess we have around, I don't know, 5,000 to 7,000 gallons of water in this one little spot. And the idea is what we'll do is take his machine up there and move all of this subsoil out. Once we get an idea, the pond will probably be this whole basic area, and move that material up to another production spot. Finish digging the pond. Sorry, I'm a little distracted. There's some horseflies trying to zap me. Spread this all out, mix in some compost with it, and have more production beds upslope of this pond. I just noticed there was a heavy rain the other day and I saw water rushing right into it. That's why it's murky. We do not want that. So what we'll do is once we have the final pond laid out, we'll use some of this subsoil to make a berm to make sure that water can't flow directly into the pond. He cut through a layer of sand at the very bottom and water was rushing in. It was ice cold, so I think we kind of scraped into an aquifer or accessed a spring at about 8 feet down, and that's what we want to keep this pond filled, not surface water. So that's some more work to be done. We're seeing that the soil that comes out of the pond, although it's pretty lean, low organic matter, lots of rocks, it has enough nutrient that it seems to be okay. So we did a little test hole about a month ago that filled with water nicely, and these squash were planted into that. They've since gotten a little bit of compost around them, but they're growing in the soil that's here from the pond excavation. So it seems promising that we should be able to grow crops in this soil. Otherwise, what do we do with all that? It's a huge amount of material. So building up and making permanent beds out of it would be pretty exciting. Definitely a project sooner than later is to figure out keeping deer out of the area. Of course, they're going to find this space and come through. So this whole bed has acorn squash planted on the edges, again, to sprawl out and fill the walkways, and then a grain amaranth through the middle. And what's interesting is the deer have come through and hit most of those grain amaranth. They missed a few. The lamb's quarters that are coming up that were in the horse manure we put down here, the deer aren't messing with. And lamb's quarters are great food for our chickens. And so if we don't get the grain amaranth to come to fruition, but instead get a huge amount of lamb's quarter and acorn squash, that'll still be a success for this bed in year one, considering this has an interior of just woody debris and logs and subsoil and waste hay. But we oversowed it enough with the grain amaranth that maybe we'll end up still getting a few, even if we don't protect from deer. But there are 2 beds of it. The northern one they like more than the southern one for some reason. So we'll see. The challenge right now is we've got a couple irons in the fire concurrently. And this is a good reminder to folks. If you're a little bit more thorough in your design, you can avoid this problem. building these beds, seeding them, starting to grow things, realizing we need deer fencing. We still haven't finished doing the earthworks and all that. We can't really put a fence up in a real way until we finish with the machine. So these plants will have to be exposed to deer browse until we're done digging this pond, getting all the soil moved, finalizing the machine work. Then we can finally figure out what it looks like to occlude the deer. So we'll just have to let them enjoy themselves for now. Could be worse scenarios. The sunchoke row in here, I really wish I had done 2 or 3 of these. At first I thought this did not work out, but so when my friend Juan was here, we went through and I would cut a slit in the ground. He would drop in a tuber. We mixed in 4 or 5 different varieties. We just did this right into the sod, and you can see they're all coming up now. For a little while I thought they weren't going to work out. I didn't see them until about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and now all of a sudden we're realizing, ooh, they're coming up like mad. We marked the row with these miscanthus stalks so that the mowing service that he has doesn't mow them. And I think there's some real benefit in having not mowed tightly. I did not go through with the weed whacker and hit the grass back. I think having the weediness, the little bit of wildness, I look down this row, I can see the sunchokes, but then they kind of disappear in the grasses. I think that's been helpful in keeping the deer interest minimal, if not negligible. It's cool to see with this first experiment that, 15-20 minutes to plant out this 100-foot, 80-foot long row really does work. So next season, we can just go right down the line. I think we'll do it in a way where there's not even a walking path. It'll just be one massive block of perennial calories in the ground here. That's probably a long enough video for today as far as an update goes. Definitely some issues around deer pressure coming through. Definitely some issues around the design or the execution of things, putting earthworks in the middle of planting, in the middle of thinking through fencing. Lots of noob mistakes could have been avoided if we had thought things through. But I think I'm okay with them because we're getting feedback in real time from the system. We can make adjustments on the mistakes that we're making as we go. We can have some losses to the deer. That's part of the fair share portion of permaculture. The deer are getting to eat some beautiful amaranth greens. And it's all moving forward at a good pace. We're pretty happy with it. Next step is to cut back all this comfrey and mow in there and get things a little bit more tidy. But for now, that's the update on food forest conversion. I should go turn that pump off, but my gosh, it is nice to see the cup run a thing over. Run a thing's a word, right?